Good day, folks. I've been gone for a while. Busy a week or so. A lot of people have been asking me questions about Bob. What's the end game in Israel and between Israel and Hamas? I would say, hey, I don't know. Absolutely don't know. I don't think the United States knows. I don't think the Israelis know. It's up in the air. It's an action taken without in anger, just like Afghanistan. And we know what happened. The end game was the United States has to run, right? As long as Ukraine and if you ask me about Ukraine and Russia, I could see what the end game was. The end game was to degrade Russia as far as it could be, and I think the United States were being successful, though slowly, because there were a lot of people essentially are continue to, in a sense, support Russia through oil, and one of them being in no small part being India. And now there's also information that India, the money that's stuck in India is going to get reinvested within India because it can't really go out. So that's it's win-win for India, win-win for India. But this war will take a longish time. And however, the United States also has no clue, right? So what it can do at this stage is just this: Israel agrees to delay ground invasion on U.S. nudge, says report. And what you have to know is, right, while the United States really has no choice, right? But Israel also really cannot totally disregard the nudge that's coming from the United States. So what you have here is President Biden is dictating rules of the game. This was an article in New York Times, absolutely. And why the United States is important is, you think about it, right? All its well laid out plans in the Middle East, where it was trying to extricate itself and give the burden of that region to India and local players like Saudi Arabia through I2U2, the Abraham Accords, all kind of, you need a new playbook altogether, right? So, and you were being able to see things like this. I'm ashamed of Saudi law, says Crown Prince. You never would have heard that again. A lot of trouble for the United States. Clamor for aid ceasefire as protests grow in region, not only in region, everywhere, right? And Prime Minister Sunak has to meet with the Palestinian president. The American debate on Israel is important to hear, as written by Prashant Jha. U.S. support for Tel Aviv isn't a surprise, but this support is qualified, and the shift reflects a churn within America and the world. He says, both in 2013 study and then in 2020, 54% Jews said that US policy on Israel was just about right. But by 2020, 22% also said that America was too supportive of Israel. If Biden has to take this domestic shift into account, this also has to confront new geopolitical realities. The Russia-China-Iran axis sees Israel access as a moment to dent DC's credibility, right? And the US can't afford to have that happen. India can't afford to have that happen. Preparing for what is important while preparing for ground invasion, what you really need to know is here: largest recruiting of reservists in the history of the IDF is on. Hamas needs to be destroyed as a terror entity. Easier said than done. Netanyahu's ego, Putin's ego has put them in the spot. While Putin's ego, everybody underestimated, underread, and that was American fault, led to Ukraine. One should have paid attention to it, paid heed to it as soon as he had retaken Crimea. In case of Netanyahu, is his ego within Israel itself, how he's destroyed the community, the systems within Israel for his own purpose, really. And that essentially led to the downgrading of the intelligence systems and the army. And if you have to have the largest reservist force come up, you really don't know the end game, do you really? And what really, as Chetan Bhagat says, is right, while the gaze is on Gaza, the last 2 weeks since Hamas' brutal attack have shown that it is upon Israel to recognize that only in Palestinian well-being can it find real long-lasting security, and that's true. And IMEC work begins with 3.5 lakh crore railways plan to link 8 ports on West Coast. Government sets premium on timely execution of IMEC, sets deadline of 3 to 4 years. The new deal called IMEC, India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, is grand in vision and ambition for India and the United States. It's a way to counter China. IMEC promises new model of globalization, wrote Sriram Chulia. The beauty of IMEC is that it contains something attractive in it for all 8 parties that have signed the founding memorandum of understanding. So you can see how important India was for the Middle East in the US policy. Now, whether we like to believe that not, India had become and is critical for both the Middle East and the Quad, right? Both ways. And India had it right. But then the Hamas thing happened. So now all bets are up, all bets are off. Biden links Hamas attack with West Asia reset push. So while we may be thinking that this might die down, I don't see IMEC happening in the next 5 to 6 years. And this is the critical part that the US has to understand. Russia hosts Hamas, Iran meet, draws Israel ire. So this, folks, is really what really it was. You really can see the real winner of this is the Iran-Russia-China axis. Geopolitical, geoeconomics. The India-Middle East-Europe corridor is less corridor, more about trusted connectivities, and that was written then, Ashok Malik. So you see how fast global events changed after the Hamas attack. I mean, everything was kind of hunky-dory. The United States was up and running as far as the Quad was concerned. Though you were finding that AUKUS, the Australian commitment to defense, wasn't there, so it might go off the rails. But I don't think so. And NATO was well entrenched and ready to give a good fight to Russia. But then Hamas, and here the US also got caught with its pants down. The Biden pragmatism. Middle East crisis has shown US capacity to manage different theaters of conflict simultaneously, but for how long, I don't know. The US decline tends to be overstated. The US share of global GDP continues to be around 24%. While it is true that the Western share of the GDP has declined, much of that reflects a substantive drop in European share. At the same time, it is easy to overstate China's rise. The current slowdown in the Chinese economy suggests it will be a long while, if at all, before Beijing overtakes Washington's aggregate GDP. Right? Not in our living time, right? Israel launches second stage of Gaza. From UK to US, protesters seek ceasefire. Will declare Israel war criminal, says Erdogan. Tel Aviv recalls envoy. So this is the axis. Turkey, and this is where India comes into play, right? It's really strange. India considers sending Armenia more weapons. Iran plays peacemaker as it hosts Armenia and Azeri effort. But this is a strange nexus. Armenia essentially is backed by Russia, which doesn't have the wherewithal not to support it. So the United States, India has got to get into Armenia because Armenia has Soviet weapons and India is the only one who can support it. Armenian PM indicates peace treaty with Azerbaijan on cards. Armenia seeks to know Indian way of modernizing Russian arms. So it's a funny thing. Azerbaijan is being supported by Turkey and Pakistan, Armenia by India and Iran. A very strange happening. Right? China jet flies within 10 feet of US bomber over SCS in near collision. So US has a lot more to contend with. And this guy writes this. It's really funny. Arni Guha. India go for world broker. Alliance forming has shifted from evangelical to trust-based to New Delhi's geopolitical advantage. That after this war also done and dusted, because here you come right after that, India's record on religious violence persecution slammed in US Senate. So like I said, while I don't know what's the end result here, but what I can say with clarity is that India's foreign policy seems to have come off the wheels for the time being, right? It was okay as long as there was a multipolar world, but there is no longer a multipolar world. It's the United States on one side and China and Russia axis on the other. So like as Christopher Jaffelord writes, world in flux, where India stands, the future will tell if it is at the center of global affairs or stuck between two camps. He says, in his book, The Indian Way, as Jaishankar wrote, it's time for us to engage America, manage China, cultivate Euro, reassure Russia, bring Japan into play, draw neighbors in extended the neighborhood and expand traditional constituencies of support. Now, this statement to me just suggests how theoretical Jaishankar was. This ever going to be a reality? Was India ever going to be able to punch above its weight? Especially with the dissensions and discord internally and the way we handle China? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So it was going to come off the rails anyway. The strategy aimed at maximizing India's national interests, the realpolitik way in which easier to implement if the world remains multipolar, but will it? It will not. Recent developments, including the BRICS and G20 summit, suggest otherwise. The international scene is becoming more and more bipolar, largely because of the Chinese attitude and now because of what's happened in the Middle East. Is India at the center of international affairs or stuck in the middle because of its dependence on many players who belong to the two camps which are crystallizing? The future will tell. The world abhors the vacuum, as Pradhap Dhaltara. It certainly does. He says tectonic shifts in great power politics are a consistent thread in a spate of conflicts threatening to unsettle the global order. The great powers could once deter the audacious act of sort Hamas unleashed on Israel last weekend. The US looking to craft a strategic re-entry into West Asia now finds itself pulled into the theater to accomplish the onerous task of both accommodating and tempering ally Israel's response. Okay? Then he says, New Delhi cannot insulate itself altogether, but it needs its security, intelligence, and diplomatic apparatus on high alert to both anticipate threats and leverage opportunities. The task is easier said than done because a challenge like the one that came from China in 2020 could emerge anywhere. Yet if played well, India with a stable economy and polity could ride into the better side of church. It's no longer a stable polity because Canada is not gone away, Mr. Pranab Santa. A Canadian nip in the air. The US is caught between a treaty ally and a strategic partner at a time when Israel needs it most. On Khalistan, Canada has ignored global law. It may have. Canada withdraws 41 diplomats from Indian embassy, shifts most to Southeast Asia. After Trudeau call, Sunak for India, Canada de-escalation. Canada tries to woo UK in Niger case ahead of Sunak's India trip. US-UK back Canada on diplomatic parity row. And guess what happens then? Delhi dials down, restores some visa services in Canada. India sought diplomatic parity due to Canada's interference in Jaishankar. Jaishankar does not have the wherewithal to do this. I'll be frank. You may, as an Indian, you might think otherwise. I, as an Indian, on the other hand, I think we've acted in a very short-sighted manner and very immaturely. And Vienna gives Delhi the right. Rights. Prabhash Ranjan. India is well within its right to ask Canada to scale down the size of its mission operating on Indian soil. Folks, let me tell you this. If you have to go to the Vienna rights, which is generally only used by dictators and the likewise, you have already lost them. You know, at the end of the day, you're two democracies, part of an allied system, and you have to use the Vienna system. It shows immaturity and foreign policy gone wrong. Indians illegally entering US via Canada at record high. India to resume entry, business, medical, conference, visa services in Canada. Canada recalls 41 diplomats. Trudeau says India making life hard for millions. Most certainly is. India cries parity. Canada claims international norms violated. Tough phase in India-Canada ties, says Jaishankar. India will resume some visa services in Canada. India hints at restarting Canada visas very soon. Indian diplomats in Canada were put under surveillance. I'm quite sure that was happening here too. And in the other circle of things, India is part of the united system ecosystem as far as diplomacy is concerned. And there, this relationship also came into play. UAE and India, a reliable strategic partnership. Modi speaks to Egypt President LCC on crisis in Gaza Strip. India sends medical supplies, disaster relief aid to war-torn Gaza via Egypt. After Modi Abbas talk, India sends relief material to Gaza through Egypt. India sends plane full of medical aid, other material, Palestine via Egypt. PM talks with Jordan. King calls for early resolution of Gaza conflict. Here's the United States, like I said, comes into play. JP Morgan upgrades India to overweight on run-up to polls. And India, again playing the US game. Terror knows no borders, says India, as it abstains on UN resolution on Gaza truce. Okay, no mention of Hamas. India abstains from UN Gaza vote. Committed to countering terror, India, after a UN vote on Israel-Hamas conflict. But then what happens here? Declare Hamas as terror body. Israel envoy asks India, which India doesn't. But this is where domestic politics gets messy in the Middle East. Hamas leader addresses rally against Hinduism and Zionism in somebody in Kerala. And there were two blasts apparently today. Northern Command chief reviews security in wake of Middle East conflict. Okay. Then you have this Middle East middle ground. India should not conflate Israel with Netanyahu, must strengthen Palestinian Authority against Hamas. The rise of Hamas, there is no doubt, is a consequence of Israel's persistent effort to undermine the Palestinian Authority. A weakened PA lost to Hamas in the Gaza Strip in 2007. Any strategy to counter Hamas today must necessarily restore the political salience of the PA. This in turn involves a serious effort to address its demands for full statehood. But then, boom! All bets are off for India in the region. Why? You have this death sentence for 8 Indian ex-Navy personnel in Qatar. Qatar hands death penalty to 8 former Navy men. Deeply shocking, says government. Deeply shocking. Here's a deeply shocking. The ambassador to Qatar sent by Modi for 2 years, Mr. Mittal, is now the OSD in the PMO. Hey, what's happening there? What's happening there? Were they really spying for the Israelis? Where the eagles don't dare, folks. Qatar court sentenced 8 Indian ex-Navymen to death. Delhi exposed legal and diplomatic options after Qatar death sentence. 8 Navy veterans handed death sentence in Qatar. Cream of Navy. Qatar questions a knotty geopolitical situation will complicate Indian efforts to help its ex-Navy personnel. Qatar test for India's resolve. Delhi should leverage its close relationship with Doha and negotiate return of former Navy personnel sentenced to death. Will it happen? Absolutely not without American help. Happy ending to distressing Doha story? Probably not. Pakistan using this. Pakistan forces US mortars in escalation in Jammu. Our entire, like I said, falling apart. Started talks with India on troops removal. Maldives president-elect. Deal with China leaves Nepal on hook for pricey airport. China may leverage Lankan loans to reject, get maximum concessions. China and Bhutan get closer to settling border disputes. Folks, but then, what's happening in the world? Biden evokes Shoha 9/11 in his unprecedented wartime visit. Iran can incite terror attacks on UK streets. Biden backs Israel offensive. Israel agrees Gaza can have vital aid via Egypt. Israel is not alone. Freeing hostage is top priority. Then what do you have? You have Xi doubles down on Belt and Road Initiative. Like I said, he's doing this all that he can. India press cites repression. India press cites repression. Muslim world angered after explosion. Biden embraces Israel as region boils. New divisions on views as Biden goes to Israel and Putin to China. With Putin on his side, Xi outlines his vision on a new world order. Slowly, China EV demand puts battery metal prices in reverse, right? Putin insists US missile that hit airbase will not alter course of conflict. But Biden asks Israel over hospital blast but seeks to broker Gaza aid package, right? Day of rage protests held across Middle East after Gaza hospital blast. Don't be consumed by rage. Biden tells Israel. Protesters across the Middle East turn their fury on Britain and US. Propaganda battles rage as Israel and Hamas trade blame games over hospital deaths. Biden, don't repeat our mistakes after 9/11. Jaishankar met Canada Foreign Minister Amit Rao says, report India-China hold 20th round of talks on border. Rao, Jaishankar, Canadian counterpart, held meet in China, Washington report. Israel was alerted by Egypt 3 days before the attack, says US politicians. Zelensky says Gaza war furthers Russian aims, which it absolutely does. The playbook written by Jaishankar, folks, is all but dead. Bin it for the time being. 3 cheers and Jai Hind.